Hello, welcome to Podsongs. I'm Jack Stafford, and I interview inspiring people in service to others as inspiration for a new song. Now we're back to new songs today. Sorry I had to re-release a few old episodes there just to give us a bit of breathing space due to the Italian heat wave. But now we're back to new songs. Today I'm speaking with an American film curator and cultural activist now in Amsterdam. He's become an underground cult figure there, showing films in different venues almost every night of the week, pre-COVID obviously. He's kind of a film DJ, placing them in a historical, aesthetic, political and biographical context. Please enjoy this conversation with Jeffrey Babcock.
I said, Fraser, I didn't know about your podcast before, but then Fraser mentioned it, and I just started looking at the entire array of subjects that you were investigating in a way, and I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, this is the first one about cinema, though. So.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel okay? Do you feel like you have some footing on it, and you know what to ask? Have a subject direction you want to go in, or
no idea? No.
Okay, good. Perfect. So cool.
Yeah, but you, I actually lived in Amsterdam before, and I've been to your
screening,
your screenings. Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah.
And they were great. I mean, it was one of the highlights of. Because now I live in the countryside, and
wow,
one of those things. Yeah, one of those. I mean, when you're in the city, you want to be in the countryside, and when you're in the countryside, you want to be in the city. But when I look back and think fondly of time in Amsterdam, one of the things that you miss, that you cannot get, are these kind of cultural events, like the things that you put on. I used to go to the Overtome and the New Anita, and you would talk. You would show an obscure film that I would never otherwise find, and set it all up. You told a whole story about what we needed to know, put it in context, why it's important, and that was fantastic. And that's not something I've seen anywhere else on my travels. So how did you come to start to do that? How did you set that up?
Yeah, well, I started it up. Sometimes when you at a certain point you start looking back at your life. And you start thinking, well, how did I set it up? And, what were the influences, Because there is no direct influence. It's like I never have seen anybody do what I'm doing. And so it wasn't like that. But, when I was going to university, I was going to a place called Madison, Wisconsin. And there would be these, film freaks basically on the weekends, like hippie students who would rent out a lecture hall and just kind of like show movies on the weekends, on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And then later I was looking in a film journal about 2 years ago, I think it was Film Comment, and it said, actually, if you were really into film back in the 1970s, the two best places to be were Paris and Madison, Wisconsin. And I thought every university was doing this, but as it turns out, this seemed to be a very special place. But it opened my eyes because in America, the European cinema basically doesn't exist, and anything outside the borders of the United States, South or whatever, doesn't really exist. So I just was a teenager, I was a high school student, stumbling into these university spaces and watching these incredible movies, where they were Asian films or European films or Russian films. And so that's how I think that was a big influence. I thought, wow, the power of cinema is so great in a way. So I think it was an influence in some way.
So you carried that baton all the way over back to Europe, and it's like
and changed it along the way too, because like the people that I was the screenings I was at the university, they didn't give introductions. They maybe came up and said, well, next week we're showing this movie, and this movie is directed by Francois Truffaut, and that's all I would say. So it wasn't. So I added my own luggage to it.
Yeah, but that adds so much, because really, that's the reason you go there. I mean, anyone could sit at home on their laptop, and through the joy of Netflix, we don't have to go to these screenings.
Yeah, and I think that I'm so much against this. This whole pandemic situation has kind of forced people into all the directions that I don't like. do everything online, whether it's buying things or whatever. And everybody, instead of going to a cinema, which is, about a community experience, a collective experience for me, onto Netflix, And so for me, it's a heartbreaker in a way. But at the same time, I think that so many people have been writing to me and saying they recognize how much they miss from the real life experience of a cinema. So I think once things are allowed to be to open again, I think it will be.
So what's the situation
burst.
in that? Yeah. So Amsterdam, you're closed down completely. Then how long ago?
Yeah, well, closed down completely. It's been going through different phases, And so for about a year now, though, it's been off and on in different phases. So like the beginning, it was just like no bar was allowed and only 1/3 capacity. So I had to be bringing in 15, 20 people and just seating them in certain seats, with 2 seats in between and spreading them apart in some kind of way. And then it went into heavy lockdown for about over a month now. And you can't tell when it's going to be relaxed again. Yeah. So it's terrible.
Yeah, I thought it was longer than that. When I was in Amsterdam, you have to if you want to go into a shop, you have to make an appointment online.
Yeah.
And go in. You can go in for 20 minutes and have a look around and on your own.
Yeah, exactly. But still, it's this intimate experience of being with somebody else that I think is so tragically missing. Like everybody isolated in their little apartments, told not to go out very much. And my idea is the opposite of what the government's doing. The government's being kind of very authoritarian in a way, saying like curfews, almost like home arrest, like isolation, like you got to stay home, you're not allowed to leave your homes. And I feel like, and fines for people that don't obey it. But I feel like we should be, encouraging things like that make people healthier instead of like just keeping people weak and defenseless in a way and just isolating them and putting them in their homes. I feel like, what are the vitamins you should be taking? Tell us, maybe even distribute them for free. Buy a bunch of them, distribute to the public. This is the vitamins that are going to help the immune system. What kind of exercises are you supposed to be doing? What kind of healthy foods are you supposed to be eating? This kind of thing to build up and make people stronger rather than keep them weaker and kind of like
free Netflix subscriptions.
And at the same time, people becoming, more and more overweight because they're just.
But yeah, this has been for me, the lockdown has been great because I've come across this Podsongs project. What are the positives from this experience? From
the lockdown, I can't say there's any. There was just the first phase of the lockdown was incredible when all the stores were closed because there was an incredible quietness that went through the entire city. And I was talking to a guy from East Germany, and he said, this reminds me of when I was a young kid in East Germany. Like, hey, get the whole family out. There's an airplane, finally an airplane. There was no airplanes going over the sky basically anymore, very, very seldom. And so there was a beautiful kind of solitude going through the city. And then we also understood another thing was that when you went to the dead center of the city, nobody. And that meant that it was on the streets. And that meant that nobody was living in the center anymore. The prices of the homes have shot up so much. And in the inner city, the very center of the city people used to live there. Back in the 80s and 90s, people used to live there. Now it's all been sold off. It's either being owned by foreign investors or whatever, but it's just nobody's living there anymore. And that was kind of a striking recognition of that too.
Yeah, because you've been since 1984 in Amsterdam, yeah?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
You've seen so many changes. You must know it better than the locals. Yeah,
sometimes some of the locals tell me you need a person from the outside to tell them exactly what they've lost in a way.
And what did you do before Amsterdam? Because you left America and you were a performance artist. What did you do?
Well, this is back in the 80s basically, and this was a time for performance art. So performance art could mean anything back then. It wasn't theater. but it was, coming from an artistic background and just going on the stage or going into a space and just kind of doing whatever, and so whoever I was working with, if I was working with a voice artist, then it would take that kind of direction. If I was working with dancers, it would take that kind of direction. But if I was working with, I was just totally open, and it was like exploring the possibilities of live art rather than dead art, like in museums in a way. Like museums can be like mausoleums in a way. You're just looking at all these things, and they're very static, and they're, and so, it was, the 80s were very active times, and it was also that way in the art field, I think.
You got as far as Mongolia, yeah? Yeah,
it's true. Yeah, that was a crazy experience.
What was that like?
Yeah, well, we were traveling through Siberia and Mongolia. It was fantastic, of course. In Siberia, I remember, we were playing the National Opera House of Siberia, for example. One day we'd be playing that space, beautiful balconies and so forth. Next day we'd be doing a performance for the, fish factory workers, or the glass factory workers, And so every factory has a kind of cultural space or a cultural department for people at that point in time, it was still just the end of the Soviet Union. Yeah. And so we would be doing performances for those kinds of people. And it was fantastic. In Mongolia, it was just like, another world. And it kind of breaks my heart a little bit because I was listening to a radio interview with somebody from Mongolia. I don't know, it was like right around the turn of the century. And they were building the Genghis Khan Hotel there, And what was beautiful about Mongolia was there's no foreign influence, it was so pure and so beautiful. And the interviewer was asking him, like, well, what happens if you don't like the direction the country goes in? Once you have a hotel there and you have tourists coming in, he said, we can always go back. And I said to myself, you never go back. It's just like, you can always think it's so easy to do that, but once it starts, it's really hard to stop it.
Yeah.
Progress. Yeah. Yeah.
But so why? So that you're in the theater back then. Were you like an actor? I mean, have you been in a film as well?
Yeah, I was acting in films too. But I was making films too. So, I had a friend of mine. His name was Ian Kerkhoff, and he was from South Africa. And he was here in Amsterdam, and we were making films together. And sometimes they were bigger productions for like the Dutch television, or even for the cinema. And sometimes they were just like very small productions with no money, and it would be just him and me basically. And I'd have the microphone, and he'd have the camera, and if there was nobody, an actor or something like this, then the movie would just be me as the actor. And so we would just work absolutely small units. And I think this is a kind of spirit that's missing these days also, because, for example, here in Amsterdam, if you want to get funding for a film and you say, oh, I want just a little bit of money, just to make a small little film, they say, it's not professional. You got to have this quite big budget, and you got to have a crew of 20 people, and you have to, they push it in that kind of so-called professional direction. And I think that, a lot of this spirit gets killed. It needs like 2 or 3 people running around the streets with the cameras, and,
there's all these festivals now for iPhone movies.
Yeah.
You have to shoot it on an iPhone and with no additional lighting and no editing. What do you think of that? Is that in the spirit? Or?
Yeah, I don't know. It could be. No. It could be. I haven't been to any of those festivals and seen many of those films, so I really can't say. But cinema for me is it's not about small screens once again. So I don't know. I'm not going to comment upon that. I love the freedom and independence that brings, and so that's cool. And I'm not sure if it's really, there's a lot of ideas that are good in ideas, but when they're in actuality, it doesn't really come across. So in the end, so that might be something, like you say, a possibility of opening things up, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the quality of it. I'm not sure about the quality of cinema in general these days. I'm quite, I find it very, very rare. If you look at the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, there's beautiful, so many movies. And Today, okay, I'm not going to say there's nothing coming out, but it's pretty rare. I mean, for somebody with my taste in a way, or my sensibilities, we'll put it that way. There's a lot of imitation. There's a lot of hypes. There's a lot of remakes. There's a lot of imitations, and just in terms of aesthetics and templates of how you're supposed to make cinema. Once again, a lot of people go to film schools, and film schools didn't really exist, back in the 50s and 60s. They did a little bit in the 1960s starting. But so people would learn from real life, and by having it. I mean, that's what the Russian director, Andrei Tarkovsky says. He says, about film school, he said, 3 weeks. That's all you need, 3 weeks. Learn how to work the camera. Other than that, what you need is real experience, life experience. You have to have something to say. And so this is the most important thing. And so that's the part that I find kind of missing these days. It's more about the technical stuff has become easier, but the meaning and the something to say is getting lost, I think.
The same with art and art schools, isn't it? If you put everyone through the same factory and teach them the same things, inevitably you just get homogenized ideas. And
I mean, I was doing lectures at the local art academy here quite often before, but I mean, I find it really, my point of view of the art world is that, you had this old school idea of the artist that's began at the beginning of the last century, people like Van Gogh and all these artists, Giacometti, and all these artists that were, in Paris basically, or in other places, but right around that period of time. And they were a lot of times poor. They didn't have any money, but they just had a vision and they were following it, and then that's what their life was about. Then, in the 1960s, you had these New York artists, and I know it's, I've had a lot of discussions with people, but I say it's people like Jackson Pollock and even Andy Warhol, and so these kind of people said, rightfully said it, well, other people, there's all these artists that, live their whole life in poverty and then they die. And then a lot of people make money off their work after they're dead, And so they said, we want our money now. But then they kind of made artists into businessmen or business people at that point in time. And so there was a lot of marketing. And even if you look at Andy Warhol's setup, he called it the factory, and he did the silk screens and so forth of his work because you could do multiple copies of it. So instead of selling one piece of art for a certain amount of money, you could sell a bunch of them, and he'd have other people just, he'd do the master, and then everybody else is printing them out like in a factory in a way.
But Rembrandt in Amsterdam, he had so many assistants, didn't he? And
that's true. Yeah.
So, I guess there's nothing new. But Andy Warhol, he was an art project himself, wasn't he? I mean, he was. Yeah. So that was an experience.
Definitely. But in any case, since then in the art schools, they teach you how to market your work and blah, blah, blah. And, I find this has changed the character of what it means to be an artist these days.
Well, look at music. I mean, same story, no?
Yeah. No, it's true. Yeah, it's really hard. And so, go ahead.
Do they teach more about how to get your Spotify plays up, in music schools than... how to make something original, I think. Yeah.
Well, that's what, that British critic or philosopher Mark Fisher was talking about. He says, look at all the music that came out in the 60s, or between 1960 and 1980. And, it's incredible amount of stuff. Then 1980 to, the end of before the turn of the century. And then now since the turn of the century, he said, if 1995, you would have played the music that people are playing now on the radios, people would say, there's nothing new in a way. And so there's a lack of imagination in a way. And this is why I try to use, in my way, cinema as a way of opening up the imagination. For me, like I say, cinema is a collective experience. Cinema is about, it's a mysterious, things that happen every day, you have a tendency to take for granted. And then you stop thinking about them. But cinema is a very mysterious event in a way, because, we're all getting together in a room with a bunch of people that we don't know for the most part, and we're all looking up at a screen, and we're kind of like dreaming together for an hour and a half or 2 hours, and it's a very beautiful, very poetic. You could even that collective adventure or journey that we have while we're watching a movie, then we're in it together, and this is so important. And the kinds of movies we watch, movies can be used to dumb people down, or they can be used to open up the imagination. So that's why I said I'm not so crazy about most cinema today, because I feel like it's dumbing things down and repeating. Because if you see, let's say you have a template or a formula of how to make movies, and then you just see that repeated in slight variations over and over and over again, your brain also starts becoming structured in that way, and the way that you perceive things in some kind of way. But when you start seeing movies that bang go off in all different directions, then I think that it opens up lots of different doors in people's consciousness or in the way they think. Like David Lynch, for example, he said that when he was in high school, he was like, he said I didn't have much going on upstairs. He meant like mentally, and he said, I was like, into cheerleaders and Coca-Cola, and and then he said, but it was the 1960s. So the 1960s was about creativity. It was about art, And he said that came into me, and it changed my life. It transformed my life. And he says today our culture is about business. So back in the 60s, the culture that existed in the United States at that point in time was opening up the creative side of people, where today our culture is opening up the business side of people. So there you go.
Yeah, I sing a lot about that, the materialism of our society, and this quickening, like you say. I mean, it's visibly the way they edit movies now, and I can't watch them. It's like they're on double speed.
Yeah. And, that would be okay if it was just one film or just a couple of films. But when everything starts wrapping up and becoming faster and faster, then it's like, I say, like, if you go, I mean, that's how I think it's a reflection of our society in general, where everything is going faster and faster and faster, and we're going so fast that we don't know where the fuck we're going, in a way. And when you are in a situation like that, let's say you're driving a car, you're going faster, faster, faster. First of all, faster implies that you're falling, that you're going to hit something really hard at one point. But in any case, if you're going faster and faster, you don't know where you're going. You're going to hit a brick wall or something like that at one point or another. And I think that's the way our society is going. That's what's happening. And it's reflected in films, like you say.
Do you know how many people right now, well, in the future, are listening to this podcast at double speed? Or even they're listening now, and our voices are quite high. So there's so many people listen to podcasts like that. I can't
really.
Yeah.
See, I have no idea. I
had one guy on the podcast, and he watches movies. If he's not enjoying a movie, he'll put it onto double speed.
Damn.
Yeah. What do you think of that, Jeffrey?
Yeah, that's the end of the world. That's the end of the dream. I'm afraid. Yeah.
I mean, to what end? I mean, yeah.
You
got to think about what it is. I think it's if you can't exist in the present moment, and if the present moment is all there is, you can't exist. You're not really existing. You want to escape. Yeah.
It's true. Yeah. And people are in the present moment. And, there's also that kind of weird kind of like Buddhist aspect that you have to live in the present moment, there is that kind of spiritual argument in some kind of way, but the kind of way that people are doing it these days, it's pretty devastating.
It's like it's better to watch 2 movies in a night than one. Is there some sort of cumulative
Yeah.
Is like, did you get more education, and then to what end? I mean,
yeah, exactly. And you show a movie to somebody that's 7 hours long or 8 hours long, and they go, "Fuck, man, how the hell can anybody watch an 8 hour movie?" But then, watching a TV series all in one weekend or in one night, even just going through the entire fucking set, that's no problem. So
and you know how repetitive some of these are, because they have to pad them out. If they've got to fill 20 hours of time, they could condense it down into much more. There's a lot of padding there as well. So that's a whole insanity. I mean,
yeah, and we
sound like two old men here, though, don't we? We really do.
Yeah, but some people say that they accuse me of being nostalgic, and I'm saying no. I mean, there is a kind of almost self-righteous kind of condemnation of the past. I get a little bit of a feeling that a lot of people today think we're in a brave new world, because of technology, because of all these things, and nothing in the past in history applies anymore. So don't care about it. Don't give a damn about it anymore. And that never existed before. Like it's like in May '68 in France, when all the students were taking over the universities and the streets of Paris. One of their models was, 100 years earlier, the Paris Commune in 1873 or what it was, and nobody was saying like, "Oh, you're thinking about the past." I mean, it's just like the past is material, and it's very rich, and we have to be able to access it and learn from it. People aren't learning from the past at all, and if you're in the present, you don't have a past, you don't have a future either. I mean, it's just like you're stuck in this kind of dead zone at the moment, I think. So I think that cinema, also getting back to cinema in that way, so many of the movies I'm showing are from the past. And for me, and actually for the people that come into the cinemas, they're actually more alive than the movies that are in the cinema now, because they're breaking the stereotypes. They're offering something new to people at this moment. So I think that this is a very crucial point in time, to tell you the truth. And I think people will start, I mean, I don't believe in nostalgia, but I do believe in learning from the past. And, progress just because things are changing doesn't mean it's progress. And I think that people feel that way today. And once again, you might have heard me say about, the faster. That's the argument why we need 5G. And I said, I'm not going to go too much into the 5G arguments, because a lot of people are polarized about it. But one thing's for sure, we don't need to go faster. We need to learn how to slow down for a change.
Yeah, that's a whole podcast. But you show, it's like, there's a parallel. When you watch a movie, for example, a good movie, I always hear the critics say, well, it's not really about this, that you see what it's about, the main story. But really, it's when you listen to a good critic, they say, no, it's fundamentally about the relationship between this and that and that. It's not about that car chase. And your movies and the way you show them is, like you say, it's more about community. So you remind me of someone like, there was this guy, Jim Haynes in Paris, who had people come round to eat in his house once a week, and he just opened his doors, and he did it for many years, because eating is something also that we do on our own. But when you eat with other people, and it's it's a food for all the senses, no? So, and that's what you bring to people with your events, screenings.
Yeah, and when I do the screenings, you're right. That's part of the one aspect of it. But at the same time, food everybody likes if it's made well, almost automatically. Where I do realize that a lot of people are coming to my cinemas don't know anything about cinema. So it's a little bit different. And like I say, a lot of people dismiss the past these days. And so when people stumble into my cinemas one way or another, I always had to give an introduction and kind of like make a bridge for people, because the bridges are there. And these films have, you can see a movie from 1953 that has more to do with our lives right now and how we're living it than anything that's playing downtown in the big cinemas.
So give us some examples. What films are you dying to show people as soon as the lockdown's open?
Well, I mean, everything I'm showing things right across the board. So, the week that it was happening just before everything was shut down, I know I was going to show a Polish film called Shock Treatment. And that was describing Poland back in the 1980s, and the Polish people had very, what you're talking about with the storyline. This is a very American way of making films. Like, in a way, you had the script, which is story, like you say, car chases or people meet in the restaurant, blah, blah. It's the script. Where here in Europe, the film was about, in a script, there's never anybody looks out the window and just looks at the landscape or there's all kinds of other things that are happening in our lives. It's not just a story in a way. And so European cinema was more like that. Polish cinema back in the 1970s and 1980s, there was censorship. So they weren't allowed to speak directly about what they wanted to say. And so they would actually have their topic of what they wanted to get to the audience. And then they wouldn't put it in the movie, but they would create a film which was like beating around the bush in a way so furiously all around that missing subject that the audiences were able to recognize what the movie was about. And for the censors, there was nothing to take out because there was no offending material. So they devised a very special, very beautiful. They did a little bit in Czechoslovakia also, in a way. There's a great film that I'd like to show every once in a while called Jonas Will Be 25 in the Year 2000 by a Swiss director named Alain Tanner. And this is about 5 people who all lived in Paris during May 68. But now it's 1975, and they're all disillusioned because, May 68, with these uprisings, they wanted to change society. They wanted to create a new world. And then it was all beaten down. And then they're left disillusioned. And so all of them are trying to find ways to struggle in a society where they've lost their dreams. And it's a very beautiful film. One person becomes a teacher. Other people are, going into ecology. And once again, when you see that movie too, you realize that so many of the topics that people are talking about today as being huge crises in our society and in our world were all discussed back in the 1960s, whether it's ecology or how we organize society or welfare or health and blah, blah. All this stuff has happened in the 60s, and you can see it in the cinema. Once again, you can go back to those movies and see that. And then in the 70s, everything started changing and bang, everything was just dismissed for another 30, 40 years. And now we're seeing all these kinds of ramifications now, I think. But it was all being discussed in the 60s.
Yeah, the 60s.
Yeah.
The Awakening.
Yeah. And there's other films. I mean, there's... I can show anything. So I can show what people call art house films. But I feel art house cinema has become a box, also kind of stereotype. So I don't like that label. And I don't like any film that kind of reeks of art house aesthetics, we'll put it that way. So I can show an old Polish film, or I can show an old French film from the 1940s, but I can also show Japanese erotic cinema, pink films, and there's a beautiful one that I want to show called The Lonely Cow Weeps at Dawn. So we're talking about a soft core porn film, right? And it's called The Lonely Cow Weeps at Dawn. What an incredible title for a movie. And the whole movie is like a soft porn film, but has a beautiful kind of melancholy atmosphere and mood to it, So, I find that amazing. I really love things like that, There's films by Aki Kaurismäki, the Finnish filmmaker, but I'll go back and show an early film of his. For example, there's one called Karamari Union that he made in the early 80s. Wonderful film about 5 guys all named Frank, and they're drinking like crazy, like they do in Finland. And the whole movie is them just trying to get from, in the middle of the night, trying to get from one side of Helsinki to the other side, and all these adventures that they come across where they've broken apart and they're trying to fight each other back. But it's this incredible world and just about five guys just trying to get across the city. I find these kinds of things so beautiful, to tell you the truth.
Do you ever like to compare films or find parallels between them, and like you do mini,
I do that. I do that sometimes, but
how this one influenced this one, and
yeah. I do that sometimes. But what my programming because like normally I have about 8 or 9 places every week where I'm showing movies. I mean, not every week, 8 or 9 locations where I'm showing movies all the time. I'm showing movies about 4 times a week. This is the normal rate that I'm doing. And when I'm trying to compose those 4 films, and I am composing those 4 films, I'm basing it on diversity. So I'll never show 1 week of all a certain kind of film, a film noir or Russian cinema or whatever. I'm composing on diversity. So I'll pick out one film that I want to watch, and then I'll try to pick another film that week that's exactly the opposite in most ways from the film I picked. And the other 2 films had to be contrasting foiling against those others. So, I mean, I really believe in diversity. I don't want to get stuck in any kind of corner. And through that diversity, once again, that's how the mind gets opened up. I feel, and the imagination gets opened up.
Yeah, you have such a huge library of knowledge of films. I mean, did you just pick it up, or where did you get your education then on you from all these films?
Yeah, I went to university, but I was thrown out after the 3rd year. What can I say? They were trying to teach us how to make commercials, in the film school in America. And I guess the teachers felt like, well, these people have to, these students have to find a way to make a living afterwards. And so it's our responsibility to teach them how to make commercials, But for me, commercials weren't about the kind of filmmaking that I was interested in. Anyway, they'd skip project, here, you make a commercial. I come back, they said, not a commercial, and to do it again. And I did it again. And they said, still not a commercial. We'll give you 3 times you're out or whatever. And so they threw me out of the film department, which I didn't really care, because what was I going to do? Get these papers saying I graduated from film, and what the hell am I going to do with these papers anyway? And so it didn't matter to me. What mattered to me was I was in university. I was learning the basics of cinema. I was watching a lot of the history of cinema. I was taking courses on Russian literature. I was taking courses on French existentialism. I was taking all these things that I wanted, and I got a foundation. And then after I had the foundation, then I could just teach myself for the rest of my life.
Your enthusiasm, your hunger, fueled the fire.
Yeah. I mean, I never had to be one of those kind of people that have to have a deadline or an exam in order to learn. I mean, I just have that kind of fire anyway, just naturally.
But are you part of like a network of film, around film people around the world? Do you share films, or are there any new directors you would recommend, or you do follow? Is there anyone good today?
No, because the ones maybe, but not really. I'd have to think about it for a while. Most of the directors that are making films today that I think might be still making interesting things were people that got their foot in the door 30 years ago and are still there. Like for example, in the United States back in the late 60s, they had something called midnight movies. And midnight movies would be shown in cinemas at midnight on Friday night, usually, sometimes Saturday night. And this was a slot. What happened was that all these people were making films, and they were not commercial movies in any way. And they would say, they come up to the cinemas and say, look you just closed at night anyway. And you won't take this film during the day because it's not commercial enough. But just open up the doors, and why not? And give it a shot. And so they would just show other kinds of movies that weren't normal. And that's how Eraserhead by David Lynch first got made, got shown, I should say, and Alejandro Jodorowsky films like El Topo and The Holy Mountain. These films were, if it hadn't been for that situation, which only existed like from 1970 to 1976 or something like that, those films would never have been shown, and David Lynch would never be David Lynch after that point in time. So those kind of spaces are so important, for new energy, new ideas to come out. And now the market system, the distribution system is so tight and so business oriented that I think that's one of the reasons why I don't see too much more coming out that's new and fresh. The question is, you make something, even on a low budget, then what do you do with it? You put it on YouTube in the end, or what? I mean, it's not cinema anymore in my eyes, and so it's very hard with distribution. I call myself a cultural activist because I believe in this fiery enthusiasm about the possibilities of cinema, and I'll talk about that in just a second. And so. For me, cinema is this. Cinema is meant to change our lives in a way. If we can't, I don't believe in cinema as entertainment so much. So I believe that only if it doesn't change our lives, then it's not worth anything, cinema. So I'm not a film nerd. Like, for example, like this is an example, like back in the 1970s in Germany, you had a lot of, like, say, socialist groups or revolutionary groups, but they would be these people they would call them armchair revolutionaries. And these were people that usually had a lot of money, and they were like in head of some kind of revolutionary party, but they basically lived very bourgeois kind of lifestyles and kind of like sat around a lot and had discussions about and so those were called armchair revolutionaries. For me, I'm not interested in armchair cineasts in a way. I'm interested in cultural activism. I'm interested in cinema and culture that's going to change our society. There was like this artist, Joseph Beuys, from the 80s, I guess, in Germany. And that's what he believed. His idea was this: you're an artist, and a lot of artists are limiting their work to a canvas or to some clay to make a sculpture. He was saying, well, let's step back, and maybe the artist should be involved in creating our society. So instead of just limiting yourself to a statue or with clay, think of our society as clay and start forming our society and having a big impact and influence on that, where a lot of artists today are just following the financial system it's being set up. So I call myself a cultural activist, but I have friends that have called me a distribution activist also, because that's also true. Taking all these unknown films that are being forgotten about and buried in the past in a way, and bring them up again, dig them up, bring them up, and just make them fresh again, make them relevant to our lives again.
I'm going to use that term, cultural activist, because I also try with my music to have songs that actually mean something.
Yeah.
Than just good fun for the ears, because I mean, that's chewing gum for the ears. It's terrible.
Yeah, and and the fact that kind of thing has been happening for so long now, for the last 20 years, 25 years or so, you can see our whole world is going in the wrong direction. We don't need more of that bubblegum stuff, We need something that's more deeper and more thought-provoking and really reflecting our lives in some kind of way, and engaging in our lives in some kind of way.
But it's inspiring what you said about David Lynch, that the little water in the desert can lead to a flowering just for a few short years if there's changes in the distribution, because we have Netflix, we have Spotify. It's really squeezing everything into the center, and AIs are deciding what people see, what works. So inevitably this race to the bottom, no?
Yeah, no, totally. And people are becoming polarized because they're not together anymore, and their algorithms are sending them off in different opposite directions, and they can't
Yeah.
talk to each other anymore because they're mostly talking through the internet anyway, and to people that they don't even know, but having these incredible arguments. I don't know. I just talked to somebody, a friend who just we had it, because I'm watching movies with friends here sometimes during the so-called lockdown period, and we had a discussion about social media, and she was saying at that point, oh, social media is fine. It's just like people communicating. That's all there is to it, and then literally 4 or 5 days later, she made a comment somewhere, and she started getting attacked for it so heavy. And people were trying to post pictures of her online, trying to find out her address, sending her threatening. This is the dark side of all that.
Yeah.
And there's no communication. Once again, people are just being polarized, and there's no conversation. So it's I don't know what's going to happen next. So
Well, we need more curators like you, Jeffrey, out there. We need to get out of lockdown. That would help a lot as well. No.
Yeah, no, but yeah, it's going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
So it's going to.
And you wrote a book as well, yeah? You've not just.
Well, I'm a very uncommercial type of guy. I really believe in slow, kind of like slow, also slow, but also very local and kind of, my cinemas have been in danger of growing, and I've always had to start thinking about, okay, how do I stop them from growing,
Wow.
Because when something's perfect as it is, why make it grow and then lose what you have? I mean,
Right.
Something's perfect is perfect, simple. And so it's been a struggle to keep the cinemas small and kind of real for me, in some kind of way. So,
You've done over 2,000 screenings now, yeah?
yeah, yeah, exactly. And getting back to your question about the books, I did the same thing with the books. You're never going to get a book of mine on Amazon. You're never going to. I just don't. I know what I do is I write a book. Or sometimes I write it with a friend or something, and I print the book, 300 copies, sell them at the cinemas. I have my own distribution avenue, in a way, the cinemas, because people are coming, and they're all being sent out and that way, and I make them for cost price or for free. And then after the 300 copies are gone, they're gone. Simple. And then go on onto the next thing, So it's about keeping things small and real and intimate, the intimacy of the cinemas I'm doing, let's say 50, 60 people. After that, possible a little bit, but it gets, more and more tricky to keep up the intimacy, the connection with the audience. I'm always fighting to keep them as small as possible in a way. So audience starts getting too big, I start showing a really difficult film, that really fantastic film, but still more difficult, and it kind of knocks the audience down a little bit. But the other thing about the cinemas, as they've been created, is that I have all different kinds of people, so I like diversity in terms of the movies that I'm showing, but I also like diversity in terms of the audience. And so I'm always got an eye on that. And I'm always noticing, if there's too many men coming suddenly, then I start questioning about my programming, because it shouldn't be that way, it should be. And so I look at the kinds of people that come into the films. Some people are film freaks because they have no other possibility to see the film that I'm showing. So, and they've heard about it, or they know about it, or they're curious about it, and they're coming for it. Other people don't know anything about cinema whatsoever. And I love that. I love that those people are together in a room. And I also like the fact that from economic backgrounds or ethnic backgrounds, they're all this incredible diversity, so we can have a punk, from Poland next to somebody from Dutch television, and otherwise in our society, those two people will never come together in any kind of space, because society is very good at separating people, and we're very good at staying in our boxes that we've been given. And so my cinema is trying to break down all those walls in a way.
So you're not just creating the movie, you're not curating the movies, you're also curating the audience.
In terms of diversity, curating and not closing it down and making it a specific thing, but opening it up and creating that dynamic in a way.
I love that. So there's too many men coming, so we'll put on a chick flick. Too many women, we'll put on a really macho film.
Not quite that extreme, but it's in it's there in a way.
The puppet master, I love it.
Yeah. Maybe I mentioned that because I noticed that at the very beginning when I was showing movies with some other people in a location, and then the movies that the other two guys were showing started being all guys. They were showing samurai films or something, I don't know, gangster film, and all guys very quickly. And I thought to myself, I'm not going there. No, I'm not interested in that. And so I always kept that in mind while I was doing the programming.
Right. So there's not going to be no Jeffrey Babcock Film Festival because that would just be the completely wrong direction.
No. And what can I say about it also? I can say, I talked about diversity. Okay, we have the films I'm showing, diverse. Audience I'm showing is diverse. But also the locations where I'm showing the movies should be diverse. So they should all have their own character, their own personality. There should be totally different mood in each one of them. So I don't want to have a template or, once again, a certain kind of space where I'm showing the movies. I've shown movies in squats because, in Europe here, we used to have something called squatting, and which was kind of an antidote to the high prices of the rents in the city. But that's become illegal. But there's still people who are squatting, and I applaud them in a way because they're doing something totally against the grain today. And they keep on doing it with a lot of determination. And, some places have been empty for 10 years, like, what's going on here, and when people need places. And so, so I show movies in squats. When there was a takeover of the university about 8 years ago, the main university here in Amsterdam, I was I was basically their in-house cinema, and so they started off in one place, which was the anthropology and sociology department. And then they were thrown out of that. And then happened about 1 week later, I was going by the main library, which is a beautiful building in the center of town, like Art Deco, a stone fortress almost like this. And it's the library, and all the students were out front. They said, "Hey, Jeff, guess what? We just occupied the library." And he said, "Well, show a movie there as soon as you can." And I said, "Well, okay, maybe Thursday, And I was like 2 days away. And I said, "I can't promise how many people can come, but I can guarantee at least, 30 people." And they said, "Fantastic, because we need to have people inside the space with us." They had the front doors all barricaded. The only way to get in was through a window that was very high in the back. And so then I put it on my newsletter and I sent it out. And I said, take a walk on the wild side. Try going in an occupied university and watch a movie there. And then I said, meet on the corner at 8 o'clock. So at 7:45, I went out there, and there wasn't 30, there wasn't 40, there wasn't 50. There was 120 people outside trying to get in. And we had to put ladders, and we had to open up another window, and we had these streams of people going in. And then they got kicked out of that place, and then then there was a main administration building called the Magden House here in Amsterdam, and then they took over there, and so I kept on showing movies there. So there's like lots of different locations, some offbeat bars that I show movies in, some old cinemas from the 1980s, like Filmhouse Cavia, squatted buildings, occupied university events. I'm really open to everything. The more different it is, the better.
But if anyone wants to come, I should. You're doing a podcast to promote this. I should say numbers are limited.
Yeah, well, I won an award a few years ago, and this was kind of a crisis point for me because I thought this award was quite big. I wasn't expecting it. It came out of the blue, and I didn't know what to do. And I immediately froze my mailing list from new subscribers and waited to see what happens, because I didn't want the cinemas to be flooded. And then I realized something. I realized all these people had heard about the cinemas suddenly. They looked for a website. I don't have a website. They looked at social media. I don't do social media. And they just give up. They didn't know where the hell I was. And so then it didn't change at all. It was wonderful. Yeah. The cinemas I do, like, there's no advertising at all whatsoever. And so the philosophy behind that is that only what I talk about very often, that only bad products need to be advertised or marketed.
Right,
in a way. It's not the whole truth, but it is true. It's because once people have something they see, experience that's valuable, they just naturally tell everybody, all their friends about it. Yeah. So my cinemas, my mailing list, how it's grown is just by people telling other people. And that's more charming in a way than, let's say, marketing, for example.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it really informed me when I was in Amsterdam. Everyone knew about it, and we went to 1 or 2 a week, and it was great. And afterwards, when I left Amsterdam, I did a lot of house concerts. I was a traveling troubadour, and I think I took part of what you do with introducing the songs, because I was playing a song, but when you know the story of the song, and people loved it, I gave big introductions. And I ended up talking more than I did playing.
Wow.
Yeah. So I definitely was informed on a subconscious level by what you were doing. So you never know who you're inspiring. In this ripple effects, maybe somebody listening to this podcast now starts some underground cinema somewhere else. So.
Yeah. And like I see a connection between what you're doing and I'm doing, in the sense is all I'm doing is trying to give respect to artists. I'm showing those films. I'm at the service of them. I find it a crime that not enough people know about that film or that artist. And I'm just trying to give that person respect, put a spotlight on that person in some kind of way, and, or, a certain kind of idea and concept that we need to be discussing that nobody's discussing enough. These are the things that I'm involved with. And I see the same thing happening with your podcast. I see the same kind of attitude, the same kind of intention.
Yeah, but you don't write a song at the end of each
no, not yet.
Screening. So I got to sit down now, and I have to summarize this conversation in music. So, do you have any tips for me about the direction of the song? I mean, do you have any ideas?
No, it doesn't have to, once again, I feel I'm a servant to cinema. So I would say you could do a song about cinema and the magic of cinema. It doesn't have to be a song about me, for example. I'm a little bit humble in that way.
Because you talk a lot about the between the worlds, or the between the light and the dark.
Yeah. So once again, for a lot of people that don't know anything about cinema, then the way cinema was before, it's changing rapidly, of course. But cinema was flickering light. They were called the flickers. They were called the flickers originally. And so what you have is basically a shot of light, an image on a screen, and then you have dark, total darkness, and you have another shot, another flash of an image, and the whole movie is like that. So approximately a quarter or a third of a movie that we're watching, 1/4 or a third of the time, we are, as an audience, are just in a room that's, if we could be objective about it and step back scientifically, so-called scientifically and so-called objectively, then we would be, for like 1/3 of the time, in total darkness, whole audience looking up at a dark, absolutely black screen, and so there is that kind of that kind of beauty about cinema in that kind of way. That's why I think of it as very magical in some kind of way, but also in terms of I wrote a book called Seances about cinema, and the seances in French means a film screening. So you go to the 7:00 seance of a movie, but of course in English and so you have this idea of people coming together and conjuring up ghosts from the past, because cinema is always about the past, because it could have been last year or it could have been 73 years ago, but they're always, it's about the past, that was recorded in the past, and we're watching it on the screen as if it's still living. In case of a lot of films I'm showing, those people are already dead. Hell of a lot of them are dead, and like there they are on the screen, and so I think I would say maybe a song about cinema.
Okay. Well, you sent me a poem. You sent me a poem as well, which was very nice. So I think between that and this flickering art, I've got enough to go on.
Wow, thank you so much.
No worries. It's my pleasure, Jeffrey.
Take care.
All right, buddy.
Yeah.
I hope to see you at screening sometime soon, somewhere in the open future.
That would be lovely. Bye-bye.
Bye, Jeffrey. Stray while you watch and curate, consume or create, allowing eternity to enter free, like the sway of a tree. You shrug in its leaves. This is the stillness that was never still, silently dreaming together. Bright light cutting our night sight, guiding our in-flight to a new polarity. Big screen informing our dreams, living our slow scenes, riding through reality. Between the light, between the dark, between the worlds. A disguised fight, machine guns of light, doing the maths up to infinity apart. The flickering art, somewhere so smart. This is the magic of the cinema, silently dreaming together. Bright light cutting our night sight, guiding our in-flight to a new polarity. Big screen informing our dreams, living our slow scenes, riding through realities. Between the light, between the dark, between the worlds. And we are the negative, exposed to a positive, the principles of photography. Rise us up and set us free. Bright light cutting our night sight, guiding our in-flight to a new polarity. Big screen informing our dreams, living our slow scenes, riding through realities. Between the light, between the dark, between the worlds. Well, it still amazes me that we can produce songs like that. Epic pieces. I'd just be happy with an acoustic song, but thanks to my musicians, Maurizio San Nicola, Massimino Vozza, and Luigi Falcioni, we're able to produce 3-course meals like that every time. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. The song will go live in a few weeks on Spotify, iTunes and Deezer, or you can download it already for $1 from my website, podsongs.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it. Just send it by WhatsApp to a friend and say, listen to this while you're driving next time. It really helps, that one-on-one sharing. And if you have any other ideas for the show, please send me a message via my website. We're also looking for guests for the Christmas episode, when we will have ordinary people on. nobody's ordinary, you know what I mean? People who are not tweeting every hour of the day, but people like Jeffrey, who are exactly like Jeffrey, who are in service to the community, people in service to others, unsung heroes who you think deserve a song. Just send me a message, recommend a friend, and we'll have them on. Alright, see you next time.